Goro Akechi is the best character in Persona 5. In fact, he might even be the best character in the entire series. But if you made this claim sometime after the release of the original game, you'd be met with skepticism, to say the least. It was only after the release of Persona 5 Royal that the Akechi advocate was given their rightfully deserved vindication. In this analysis, I'm going to be delving into his character as a whole, from both the original game and the greatly expanded story from Royal. I'm going to be discussing what makes Akechi such a multifaceted character, and how such an irredeemably evil person ended up becoming the perfect symbol for all of the game's themes. This is not one of my UPC videos, nor will it be an exhaustive look at Persona 5 itself, so I'd recommend actually playing either version of the game before proceeding, preferably Royal.
もし仮に本当にそんな回答がいるんだとしたら、僕は法で裁かれるべきだと思います。
Akechi is initially introduced as a character meant to contrast the protagonist, Joker. He's the light to his darkness, a valiant hero of justice who works on the side of the law, as opposed to a vigilante who seeks justice from the shadows. This is best exemplified by the design of his initial persona, which is, ironically enough, Robin Hood, a figure that fits into the outlaw/rebel motif present in everyone else's personas. It resembles a superhero that stands proudly in the light as a defender of justice. Unlike the Phantom Thieves, it's not enough to be a hero, he must also be perceived as one by those around him. This is in reference to how Akechi is always in the public eye as a celebrity. He's lauded as the second coming of the Detective Prince after Naoto Shirogane from Persona 4, but much of this ends up being smoke and mirrors. He presents himself as a somewhat bumbling, clumsy detective that is easy to get along with, which is how he ends up forming an unlikely friendship with Joker. This part of his character I find to be highly reminiscent of classic TV detective Columbo, particularly in how it's all a ruse to lure the people around him into a false sense of security. Akechi's reasons for putting on this act have a far more sinister purpose though. Around 2/3 of the way into the original game, Akechi forces the party to make a difficult decision: be arrested for their phantom thievery, or assist him on one last job to change the heart of Sai Nijima. We already know from the opening of the game that this job does not go as planned. Someone in the party is a traitor and has sold us out to the police. It doesn't take a galaxy brain to realise that this was probably the guy who spent most of his screen time denouncing the group, but this was never meant to be the twist. The actual twist is Akechi's reasons for doing so, which reveal him to be anything but a paragon of justice. He's actually the personal assassin of Masayoshi Shido, the mysterious black mask that framed the Phantom Thieves for the death of Kunikazu Okumura, and the one responsible for all the mental shutdowns of key political figures. Furthermore, he's the one who will end up murdering the protagonist should he fail to regain his memories during the interrogation.
これがくだらない正義の慣れの果てだ。
In the original game, Akechi is encountered one final time during Shido's palace, where we at last see him for what he truly is. Not a hero of justice, but a malicious, deceptive killer. His other persona is that of Loki, the chaotic trickster god of Norse mythology, who is the very antithesis of loyalty and heroism. He's depicted here covered entirely in dazzle camouflage. This was used on ships during World War I to make it difficult to discern their shape and distance to enemy forces. Deception has become such a natural state of being for Akechi that even the appearance of his persona leaves room for doubt. It may also symbolize that Akechi deceives himself just as much as the people around him, an aspect of his character that will come up again later. At any rate, it's during this part of the game that we discover his true backstory. Interestingly enough, it's very reminiscent of Reiji Kido from the first Persona, and could even be interpreted as a dark reflection of what that character could have become. He's the illegitimate son of Masayoshi Shido, born to a woman who was thrown aside to avoid a political scandal, and he now works as his right-hand man for the express purpose of eventually enacting his revenge. He wishes to prove to his father that he's not a failure. He's not a disgrace that is to be thrown aside and discarded. And then, once Shido reaches the height of his power, he'd reveal all of this before killing him. It's quite the Machiavellian scheme, but it's heavily implied that it would have failed, as the later scene shows that Shido was already suspicious of Akechi and was planning on getting rid of him. Akechi is a failure in almost every regard, and everything about him is shrouded in lies. He's not actually the second coming of the detective prince. He used his persona's ability to commit crimes that he could solve. While he does have a knack for deductive reasoning, he's no genius, as evidenced by the trivial way in which he's caught. A comment about pancakes spoken by Morgana, who we should not be able to understand at this point in the story.
あれ違ったかな美味しそうなパンケーキとか聞こえたから
This line in particular has become a meme among the fandom, but it reveals a lot about his character. He makes a stupid mistake while trying to come across as affable to the Phantom Thieves. The mask slips for just a moment, just long enough for us to catch sight of that deceitful trickster underneath. At the core of his motivation is the desire to disprove his worthlessness. He doesn't want to be perceived as pitiable or weak, and so he must rebel against the cruel and unjust adult world in much the same way as the Phantom Thieves. However, his means of going about this are obviously very different. Instead of fighting against it, he becomes part of the system. He adopts a destructive survival of the fittest worldview and commits the same evil that was done to him. He played a game and gambled that he would come out on top, and perhaps even deluded himself into thinking that he would. The idea that this is all just a game is a recurring motif in Persona 5. It's no coincidence that the only part of the original game he becomes a party member is Sainijima's Palace, a casino where he uses his own cunning to come out on top against a rigged system. That's right, this entire palace is just as important to Akechi as it is Sainijima. It's a metaphor for his character up to this point. This motif plays an important role in the newly added content in Royal as well, particularly in Akechi's Confidant. Originally, his Confidant automatically leveled up as you progressed through the story, but in Royal it has to be done manually by spending time with him, just like a lot of the other characters. There's an underlying competitiveness to a lot of his interactions with Joker as the two develop an unusual bond. He's delighted to see Joker as a sort of rival, and even allows his mask to slip on a couple occasions to reveal his more vulnerable side. He admits that he sees a bit of himself in the protagonist, since they're both victims of cruel, oppressive adults. The same one, actually. How much of this is genuine at any given moment is up for debate, but it's hard not to feel like there's a real sense of camaraderie blooming here. They may be at odds with each other, but their circumstances are similar. This is alluded to in rank 7 of his Confidant, albeit disguised in metaphor for a friendly game of pool. They can strike the balls to the best of their ability, but ultimately they're at the mercy of things beyond their control. Akechi has decided to play this game regardless, as we've already seen, but he questions if the protagonist is willing to make the same commitment. Will he put his life on the line and walk the same path? Will he put himself at the mercy of fate? Is he his equal? Of course, the answer to all of these questions is yes. Joker does have what it takes to become his equal, and this becomes all too obvious when he wins their game of pool. Akechi wasn't using his dominant hand here, so they aren't on the same level yet, but he recognises that he has the potential to get there, and decides that he will not be bested by him until they are. It's an important moment in their friendship that should make Akechi proud. He should be happy that his friend has managed to impress him thus far. But he isn't. His true arrogance won't allow him to be the gracious winner he's been pretending to be this time, and his ego will not be satisfied until he's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is the better man. After all, he is the famous detective prince Goro Akechi. Who is he to be half as talented? His obsession with being dominant extends to every facet of his character, and this includes possibly the only genuine bond he's ever had.
正直に言うけど、僕は君が嫌いだ。
This moment truly captures the nastiness hiding at the core of Akechi. He's not looking for a friend to best. The existence of such a person is nothing but a nuisance to him. Or perhaps, this is yet another deception at the heart of Goro Akechi, the ambiguity of which is what makes their dynamic so engaging. There is another meaning behind that game of billiards we discussed earlier, one that isn't immediately apparent. They think of themselves as the willing players in the game, but it would be more accurate to say they're the balls. Their destiny has been decided for them by forces beyond their control, and they're prisoners acting out their roles under the illusion of free will. This becomes all too clear when we discover the truth behind the false god Yaldabaoth, who set up a game with Igor to see if humanity truly has what it takes to resist their distorted desires. On one side, we have the chaotic free will of humanity. These are individuals who have decided to reject the control placed on them by society. And on the other, we have the establishment, the status quo, the collective will of the people who place law and order above individuality. This dichotomy is actually another take on the main conflict of the Shin Megami Tensei games. It's a tale as old as time, reconceptualized as rebellious teenagers versus shitty adults. Humanity's chaotic champion is Joker, whereas Yaldabaoth's lawful champion is Goro Akechi. The reason Joker was chosen is left up for interpretation. He's a player's surrogate, so he's most likely meant to represent the player's own rebellious spirit. The reason Akechi was chosen, on the other hand, is far more interesting and isn't immediately obvious. Yaldabaoth needed to bestow power upon someone who embodied his reason for being. Someone who was ruled by their distorted desires, the 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins is another recurring motif at the forefront of Persona 5. Every palace in the game corresponds to at least one of them, with the addition of vanity. Yaldabaoth even uses these capital vices as an attack during his final battle against the Phantom Thieves. He isn't handing out judgment for exhibiting these vices, as a real god would. He's instead bestowing them, like a weapon. This is because he's not a real god and merely took the form of one. He's actually more of a Nyarlathotep type creature that was given life through humanity's collective shadow. Their desire to be controlled by some kind of higher order so they never have to make their own decisions. He's a malicious entity masquerading as ordained authority, just like Goro Akechi. He appears to be a paragon of justice represented by the light of God, but his true character is one of disdain and elitism. So how do the 7 deadly sins apply? We know for sure that he is wrathful. He's entirely motivated by hatred and has a strong desire for revenge. This is so powerful that one of his persona's hidden abilities is to infect others with this same intense madness. He's envious that Joker has things he does not, such as genuine bonds with other people and inherent talents that rival his own. Which brings us to his final sin. This one is considered the worst of all sins and is said to be the root of all evil. Pride. As we've already seen, he has an intense desire to be the best, and has an excessively high opinion of himself, even though a lot of his accomplishments are revealed to be phony. He's a bit of a show-off and makes it clear by his Phantom Thief outfit. He acts humble in front of others, but the truth is he wants to be recognised as superior by the people around him, and refuses to acknowledge his own faults. Pride is the shadow run rampant, a dangerous lack of self-awareness that leads to a disregard for anyone or anything that isn't themselves. This is what makes Joker such a threat in Akechi's eyes. His very existence threatens to shatter this illusion he has of himself, and he knows it. He can never actually acknowledge the talents of Joker without also admitting that he isn't special. It's very fitting that Akechi's downfall is brought about not by Joker, who extends a hand of friendship, but himself. or more accurately, a twisted cognition of himself created by Shido that reveals him for what he truly is. Nothing more than a killer that is someone else's puppet. All this time, he thought he was following his own path, but this was just another one of Loki's deceptions. He's a slave to his own pride. This is what makes him Yaldabaoth's ideal champion. He believes him to be the perfect symbol of mankind's folly and desire to be governed. However, as we later learn, Yaldabaoth's cynical view of humanity is only half true, and this is doubly so for Akechi. The cognitive version of himself gives him an out here. All he has to do is take up his gun and kill Joker once and for all. If he's able to do that, he can go back to deceiving himself and everyone around him. His sense of self can be preserved, and he can continue being the Goro Akechi who is beloved by the people around him. All he has to do is kill the one person standing in the way. Instead though, he decides to fire the gun on himself, symbolically rejecting his hubris and role as a mere puppet. Pride comes before the fall. In the original Persona 5, this was the end of Goro Akechi's character. He puts his hopes on the Phantom Thieves to get justice in his stead, and is heavily implied to have been killed. Akechi's single act of rebellion was the first crack in Yaldabaoth's master plan. It was proof that humanity could overcome their distorted desires and reject his control, which is exactly what happens when he's defeated by the Phantom Thieves at the end of the original game. In Persona 5 Royal, the story continues beyond this point, and it's revealed that Akechi somehow survived the last confrontation in Shido's palace. He turns himself in for his crimes to repay his debt to Joker.
安心してよ。本物だから。
Despite confessing to a whole slew of crimes though, he's released shortly afterwards. And from here, things start getting very weird. Characters that were previously deceased suddenly start showing up as if nothing happened. No one but Joker and Akechi find this unusual, so they once again team up to find the cause. Long story short, and perhaps save for another video, they've been trapped in an ideal world created by the school counselor, Takuto Maruki. Even though they managed to escape from the control of Yaldabaoth, their fates are now, once again, not in their own hands. However, this time, their ruler is at least a good man at heart. He's being genuine when he says he wants nothing more than for them to be happy and content for the rest of their lives. This is such an appealing reality that the rest of the Phantom Thieves are reluctant to admit that anything has changed at all. A part of themselves wants to believe that this is their new, real world. They want to believe that all the pain they endured on their journey up to this point never actually happened. But to Goro Akechi, this was never even a question. After all, he decided to reject his status as a puppet back at Shido's palace, and it was his downfall that made him realize that, the very thing that Maruki wishes to erase. Never again will he live under the thumb of an oppressive ruler, not even one who claims to have his best interests in mind. Instead, he chooses to live by his own justice.
そんな生き方はごめんだよ。自分の道は自分で決める。
Justice is the 8th tarot card of the major arcana, and it's the one that is most closely associated with Akechi. This is the arcana to which his Confidant is assigned. Typically, it refers to fairness and truth in the system of rules that govern a country or community. This suits Akechi early on as the detective that directly challenges the actions of the Phantom Thieves, but later comes to refer to one's own personal justice. This idea of a personal justice outside of the legal system is quite important in Persona 5, and it's often left up to the player's interpretation. Are the actions of the Phantom Thieves justified? Are Maruki's actions justified? Ultimately, it comes down to one's own beliefs. Akechi originally seeks justice for his mother by becoming a wrathful avenger, but after that's finished, his only justice is escaping the oppressive system that made him that way to begin with. This is the only desire that Akechi holds, and thus he is not taken by Maruki's ideal world. It's rather ironic considering he stands to gain the most from it, as someone who is no longer alive in the real world. This is because Joker's ideal world is one where he and Akechi can be friends. Akechi knew this the entire time, and has been fighting against Maruki, knowing full well that the only thing that awaits him on the other side is death.
So what? That's the path I chose. All you have to do is stick to your guns and challenge Maruki. Or are you really so spineless that you'd fold over some bullshit trivial threat on my life?
He's been fighting for his own non-existence, his right not to be under someone else's control for the rest of his days. This is his own personal justice. But the decision is ultimately up to the player, and they're given one final chance to take Maruki's offer and live in that ideal world he promised. This choice is offered twice, but only the second time weighs so heavily on what Akechi wants. Do you grant his wish? Or do you live on happily ever after with the knowledge that you betrayed him? It's this moment that truly tests the sincerity of their friendship. There are various decisions you can make during his Confidant that will change this scene. To see the full story, you must consider him a rival, accept his duel, and lastly, decide not to forget about him. Make these decisions, and Akechi's two personas will merge together to form Hereward. Hereward the Wake led an Anglo-Saxon rebellion against the oppressive Norman King of England, William the Conqueror. He became a symbol of Anglo-Saxon heroism, and may have been one of the possible influences for the tales of Robin Hood and his merry men. The evolution of Akechi's personas are indicative of his character development. It begins with the fictional outlaw Robin Hood, the persona representing his lies. Loki represents the deceptive trickster underneath this front of heroism. But finally, at the very end of his journey, we have Hereward, a very real historic rebel. His lies eventually became the truth. He was able to rise up against the oppressive forces controlling his fate and break free from them, just like the Phantom Thieves he once hated. This is who he is at his very core. Pride may come before the fall, but this isn't entirely a bad thing, at least in the context of the Megami Tensei series and its depictions of Lucifer. Pride is a rebellious act of free will against God, something that's played out in the game itself when Joker summons Satanael to defeat Yaldabaoth. Loki is another figure who used his free will to cause mischief and defy the gods, and was bound by them as punishment. While they're initially presented as polar opposites, law and chaos, they're not so different after all, which is the true meaning behind the affinity they feel for each other. They're both representations of mankind's individuality, their free will, their desire to sow chaos and break the chains placed on them by society. The ending leaves Akechi's fate up to interpretation. The party defeat Maruki and restore their world to how it was before. One by one, the protagonist says his farewell to each of the people who helped him on his long journey. The final shot seems to show us that Akechi is somehow alive. This can be taken literally or maybe just symbolic, but in either case, one simple truth remains the same. He is finally free. Justice comes in many forms, and the right to govern one's own existence was Goro Akechi's. A true rebel, indeed. The rest of the cast can have their silly spin-offs, side stories and sequels, but I think it's better if we let Goro Akechi rest in peace.
What's a life worth in a reality that was cooked up just to satisfy someone else? I say none.